The collapse of the World Trade Center was picked up by Columbia University's observatory in Palisades, New York. The South Tower registered as a 2.1 earthquake. The North Tower registered as a 2.3 earthquake. Won Young Kim told Chris Bolin that their seismographs pick up underground explosions from a quarry 20 miles away. These blasts are caused by 80,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate and cause local earthquakes between magnitude 1 and 2. The 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center did not even register because it was not coupled to the ground. During the collapse, most of the energy of the falling debris was absorbed by the towers and the neighboring structures, converting them into rubble and dust or causing other damage, but not causing significant ground shaking.
47 huge steel columns going up the core, and they're interconnected. How do you get them to fail simultaneously so the core disappears? It looks like those core columns were cut.
The way we do this is by cutting the beam at an angle.
And our conclusion is that the building should not have fallen that rapidly if indeed fire caused the collapse. And in fact, there's one mechanical engineer, Gordon Ross, in the Journal of 911 Studies, who's done a thorough analysis based on conservation momentum.
If the official story was correct, then the heating that was supposed to cause the failure would have been a much slower event, and it would have been an asymmetric event. For the tower to collapse straight down onto itself flies in the face of what we know about steel and how steel behaves. When we have a failure in one area, then the failures tend to continue within that area, and you'd see an asymmetric collapse, possibly the upper section falling off as it twisting away from the tower and falling off. But it's very unusual to see the upper section falling straight through the path of the greatest resistance, which was straight down through the middle of the tower. It just does not add up.
Steel beams weighing up to 200,000 pounds were thrown laterally up to 500 feet. A cross-section from the World Trade Center, weighing approximately 300 tons, was embedded in the southeastern corner of the American Express building. This piece would have had to travel at least 390 feet, maintaining enough kinetic energy to embed itself in the corner of the building.
What we should have seen in the debris pile was a pyramidal shape. If it had been a gravity-driven collapse, we would have seen a roughly pyramidal shape or a conic shape. What we actually did see was a massive ejection of dust and debris and large sections of steel from well away from the towers, tens of meters away from the towers. That's hard to see a reason for that within a gravity-driven collapse.
Do you still think that jet fuel brought down the World Trade Center? In all the videos of the collapses, explosions can be seen bursting from the building 20 to 30 stories below the demolition wave. Here, 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 and here. Etienne Sauret was filming her documentary, World Trade Center, the first 24 hours, and caught both collapses on tape. Watch carefully. The tripod shakes 12 seconds before the North Tower begins collapsing. And something is knocked off the right-hand side of the building. You're probably asking, if there were bombs in the building, how would they get in there without anyone noticing? Ben Fountain, a financial analyst who worked in the World Trade Center, told People magazine that in the weeks before 9/11, there were a number of unannounced and unusual drills where sections of both the Twin Towers and Building 7 were evacuated for security reasons. Daria Cord, a guard in the North Tower, told Newsday that security detail was working 12-hour shifts for 2 weeks before 9/11, but on Thursday the 6th, bomb-sniffing dogs were abruptly removed from the building. So who authorized all this? President Bush's brother, Marvin, was board of directors at Securicom from 1993 until fiscal year 2000. Securicom, now known as Stratasec, is an electronic security company backed by Kuwait American Corporation, which provided security for United Airlines, Dulles International Airport, and from the early 1990s up to the day of 9/11, the World Trade Center. Marvin is also the former director at HCC Insurance Holdings, which insured parts of the World Trade Center on 9/11. More information on this was supposed to be disclosed and never was. To date, the SEC has not revealed what they have learned. If only we could examine the debris from the World Trade Center and figure out what happened. Unfortunately, Mayor Giuliani began shipping the remains off to recycling yards overseas before investigators could even examine it. Not even FEMA was allowed into Ground Zero. Essentially, they blocked off a crime scene and destroyed all the evidence.
Since the inception of the Federal Reserve in 1913, a number of large and small wars have commenced. The three most pronounced were World War I, World War II, and Vietnam. World War I. In 1914, European wars broke out centered around England and Germany. The American public wanted nothing to do with the war. In turn, President Woodrow Wilson publicly declared neutrality. However, under the surface, the U.S. administration was looking for any excuse it could find to enter it. In a noted observation by Secretary of State William Jennings, the large banking interests were deeply interested in the World War because of the wide opportunities for large profits. It's important to understand that the most lucrative thing that can happen for the international bankers is war, for it forces the country to borrow even more money from the Federal Reserve Bank at interest. Woodrow Wilson's top advisor and mentor was Colonel Edward House, a man with intimate connections with the international bankers who wanted in the war. In a documented conversation between Colonel House, Wilson's advisor, and Sir Edward Grey, the Foreign Secretary of England, regarding how to get America into the war, Grey inquired, "What will Americans do if Germans sink an ocean liner with American passengers on board?" House responded, "I believe that a flame of indignation would sweep the United States, and that by itself would be sufficient to carry us into war." So, on May 7, 1915, on essentially the suggestion of Sir Edward Grey, a ship called the Lusitania was deliberately sent into German-controlled waters where German military vessels were known to be. And, as expected, German U-boats torpedoed the ship, exploding stored ammunition, killing 1,200 people. To further understand the deliberate nature of this setup, the German embassy actually put advertisements in the New York Times telling people that if they boarded the Lusitania, they did so at their own risk, as such a ship sailing from America to England through the war zone would be liable to destruction. In turn, and as anticipated, the sinking of the Lusitania caused a wave of anger among the American population, and America entered the war a short time after. The First World War caused 323,000 American deaths. J.D. Rockefeller made $200 million off of it. Not to mention the war cost about $30 billion for America, most of which was borrowed from the Federal Reserve Bank at interest, furthering the profits of the international bankers. World War II. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, triggering our entry into that war. President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared the attack was a day that will live in infamy. A day of infamy indeed, but not because of the alleged surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. After 60 years of surfacing information, it is clear that not only was the attack on Pearl Harbor known weeks in advance, it was outright wanted and provoked. Roosevelt, whose family had been New York bankers since the 18th century, whose uncle Frederick was on the original Federal Reserve Board, was very sympathetic to the interests of the international bankers, and the interest was to enter the war, as we've seen, nothing is more profitable for international bankers than war. In a journal entry by Roosevelt's Secretary of War Henry Stimson,